Her eyes were huge. Her skull was misshapen. Even though we prepared ourselves as best we could, it was still a shock to see Emmy in the flesh. Mom gives birth the baby with Pfeiffer syndrome. Emmy is a very wanted baby. We tried for months to get pregnant. We visited doctors and did testing. We were at the point of discussing meds and procedures when we got that beautiful positive test. I did all the right things, ate healthy foods, and a healthy dose of Taco Bell exercise, took my vitamins. I was determined to have a much more pleasant gestational, diabetes-free pregnancy this time around. We did the genetic testing at 10 weeks of the urging of the doctor. I waited anxiously for the result. I was nearing 40, so my risks were higher. We waited on telling our then 5-year-old son until after the results came back. When the results came back as completely normal, we both breathed a sigh of relief. We also learned that with the testing that we were going to have a daughter, Baron, her big brother, who was elated. We spent the next 10 weeks in a state of bliss. We started thinking of names and planning a nursery. At 20 weeks, we went in for the routine anatomy scan with no concerns whatsoever. We held hands and laughed when we saw her on the screen. We couldn't wait for the pictures to show to her grandparents. I knew immediately something was wrong when the tech kept going over and over in her head and complete silence. I'm not sure she was even breathing. It was that quiet. After what felt like forever, she left the room and said she needed to speak with the radiologist. When she left, I cried. I told Robert that something was wrong, and they weren't telling us. When she finally came back after what felt like an eternity, all she said was that the doctor was waiting for us upstairs. I could hardly get on my feet. We went upstairs and the doctors told us there was some sort anomaly with their skull. They wanted us to go to a maternal fetal medicine doctor the next day to get a better scan with better equipment. We did exactly that. A doctor I'd never met in my life told us that our baby likely had a type of dwarfism that was incompatible with life, and went over our termination options in great detail. She told us we had to hurry because our time for legal abortion was coming to an end, and I'd have to fly out of state if I waited too long. My head was spinning, and I told her I wanted another opinion before making any decisions about the future. Since Amy's skull was showing signs of fusion, she recommended we visit the cranial facial department at Seattle Children's. We made the appointment for the next week, and in the meantime, we had a trip planned to the happiest place on earth with her brother to celebrate him becoming a big brother. It was the most heart-wrenching week of my life. We had all our files sent to the craniofacial team and met with one of the doctors there. He took one look at her scans and said that the initial diagnosis was completely incorrect and that he was 98% sure she'd have Pfeiffer syndrome. He told us the good and the bad, but assured us that she could live and have a very good life. She would need surgeries, probably many, but she could be a happy child with a fairly normal life. We fired the other doctor immediately. Pfeiffer syndrome is a genetic condition that can happen to any fetus. Nothing we did or didn't do caused Emmy to have this condition. There are many concerns with Pfeiffer syndrome, but the main issues resolve around the premature fusion of the skull. The fusion causes the sutures to be closed too early, and in Emmy's case, all the typical skull openings were closed. It causes shallow orbital sockets, which give her protoplasts or the bulging of her eyeballs. The craniosynostosis also causes her mid-face nose and upper jaw to be squished, which in turn causes a narrowing of her airway. The next 18 weeks went by full of ultrasounds and clinic visits. We prepared a dream team of doctors to be ready for when she was born to help support our airway. When the big day came, we were both excited and terrified. Even though we prepared ourselves as best we could, it was still a shock to see Emmy in the flesh. Her eyes were huge. Her skull was misshapen, and they intubated her immediately before I even got to look at her. Shosla has the most beautiful blue eyes and dark hair. She had this bump on the side of her head where the cerebral spinal fluid had collected because it wasn't draining normally, and her hydrocephalus had become severe. My honest thought when I first saw her was that it wasn't supposed to be this bad, but at least her eyes could close. Our doctors didn't say anything. She was focused solely on me and stitching me up after my C-section. The nurses were almost silent. Emmy was silent. It was eerie and terrifying. They rushed her next door to the OR. We scheduled with a neonatal specialist and ENT to be on hand for delivery, and I only saw her after. Most families don't know about the diagnosis until birth, and it's a shock. We had the knowledge beforehand, so everyone just focused on making sure we all made it out of that OR in the best state possible. We spent the first 4 months of Emmy's life in the hospital. The days were long, stressful, and scary. We had to make decisions daily about our care. We had to discuss DNR paperwork and quality versus quantity. We celebrated and we cried. We fought and we pleaded. Emmy is now 18 months old. She's probably had 20 surgical or medical procedures. She had an intestinal male rotation fixed, a G-tube placed, a tracheostomy, and 3 skull surgeries to help her brain develop. She's got several more in her future, including a major facial surgery to expand her mid-face in the summer. She's doing remarkably well these days, probably more so than anyone ever expected. We've had hospital stays in emergencies, we've had PICC lines and long nights of worry, but she smiles through it all. She continues to grow and develop, albeit at a slower pace than other kids her age, but she shows a determination that's unbelievable. Scott's parents that love her, a brother that thinks she hangs the moon, grandparents that encourage her, and a team of doctors, nurses, and therapists that give her every tool possible to thrive. We all know that Emmy will always look different, and that she'll face cowards and bullies in her lifetime. But our goal is to always show her how loved she truly is, and empower her to be everything she wants to be. We hope that sharing her story will pave the way for her in the future to get less stares and more. Let's play. Another life shock. A Texas woman who nearly lost her life after giving birth was reunited at home this month with her now 4-month-old daughter and 2-year-old son. Christina Pacheco, 29 of Pleasanton, Texas, gave birth to her daughter Amelia on October 24, 2022, and what she described as an uneventful C-section delivery. 2 days later, on the day she was discharged from the hospital, Pacheco said she started feeling feverish, but assumed it was just part of a recovery post-C-section and was given ibuprofen by a nurse. When she continued to feel unwell at home, Pacheco said she went to see a doctor who sent her to a local emergency room. From there, Pacheco was airlifted to a hospital in San Antonio, where doctors discovered her body was in septic shock. I just remember I couldn't breathe anymore, and I couldn't see anymore, and I just started slowly fading out. Pacheco told ABC News, "My husband, I could just hear him saying, 'Please come back to us. Please, your babies need you. I need you. I need you to be here and help me with our babies.'" And that's the last thing I remember. Septic shock is the most dangerous stage of sepsis, which occurs when your body has an extreme response to infection. According to the National Institutes of Health, without quick treatment, it can lead to tissue damage, organ failure, and even death. In septic shock, the body has dangerously low blood pressure. Risk factors include recent infection or surgical procedure. In Pacheco's case, the condition began to affect her heart, lungs, and kidneys, according to her husband, Jacob Pacheco. Jacob Pacheco said his wife was simultaneously put on dialysis to help her kidneys and on an ECMO machine, a life-saving device that removes carbon dioxide from the blood and sends back blood with oxygen to the body, allowing the heart and lungs time to rest and heal. They didn't want to tell us how close she was to death, but you could see it in their faces every time I asked. Jacob Pacheco said, adding the doctors at the time gave his wife a 20% survival rate. It was scary. Jacob Pacheco, a coach and teacher who met Christina because they both work in the special education field, said he relied on family and friends for support as he stayed by his wife's bedside, while also needing to care for their newborn daughter and young son. We would bring them to the hospital, and our families would meet there, and we would take care of them in the lobby, he said of their children, Amelia and Owen. It was, living just day by day, just trying to take care of Christina. For the 2 weeks, Christina Pacheco remained in the intensive care unit and on dialysis at the ECMO machine. Jacob Pacheco said he and his mother-in-law and father-in-law took turns sitting by her bedside. In mid-November, Christina Pacheco began to turn a corner and improved enough that doctors were able to take out her breathing tube so she could speak. The first thing she said to me was, "What happened to me? Did I almost die?" Jacob Pacheco recalled, and we had a moment of tears. Tears of sadness, tears of joy, just a bunch of emotions coming over us. Though Christina Pacheco is now awake, she still had to face what she now describes as the hardest thing she's ever been through. Just before Thanksgiving, she said doctors told her they'd need to amputate both of her feet and hands because of the damage that had sustained while she was in the ICU. One of the risk factors of an ECMO machine is poor blood flow to the limbs, which can result in the need for amputation according to the Cleveland Clinic, which was not involved in Christina Pacheco's medical care. My hands and feet were black. They looked like a person who had gotten frostbite, she said, adding that her medical team tried to do everything they could to avoid having to amputate. I was just breaking down and being absolutely crushed that that's where we were at that point. Christina Pacheco said of learning amputations were necessary, and crying with my family, crying with Jacob, and just being sad that my life would no longer be the same. In addition to undergoing an initial surgery that ampute both arms below the elbows, followed by a second surgery later to amputate both legs below the knees, Christina Pacheco said Sheep underwent nearly 12 skin grafts over the next several weeks because the skin around her amputations was so damaged. Every day, I woke up and thought about my babies, and every time I went into a surgery, my thought was, I have to get home to be with my babies. So if that means going through one more surgery, then ultimately, I have to go through another surgery, she said. They were my number one motivation, hands down. In late January, 3 months after she was admitted, Christina Pacheco was discharged from the hospital and moved to Tir Memorial Hermann, a rehabilitation center in Houston. There, Christina Pacheco, who previously taught group fitness classes outside of her full-time job, spent several weeks healing or amputation wounds and learning to live as a double amputee. Well, also rebuilding her strength after a 3-month-long hospital stay. Any task? Any exercise? I tried it and I gave it my 100%, she said, adding that she started applying the motivation she taught in group fitness to herself. I would self-talk to myself like, come on, you've got this, just get to it. So I would push a little. I even surprised myself some of the time. Dr. Vinay Vanodia, medical director of the Amputee and Limb Loss Rehabilitation Program at TR Memorial Hermann, said Christina Pacheco's self-motivation helped her progress really quickly in rehab. He continued, any challenge we put in front of her, she was able to accomplish. She just gave a 100% and was able to make a lot of progress while she was with us. I cried, she said at the moment she arrived home. I hugged Jacob really tight. He knew I was overcome with emotions. Jacob Pacheco said the new challenges have arisen as his wife has settled in at home, but they're moving forward looking at each new challenge as a new chapter in their story. It's not easy and it's not going to be easy, he said. We were definitely crying yesterday, and it's okay to think about those things. It's not easy, but if we're sticking together, it makes it that much better. When it comes to her kids, she described them as resilient, and said her 2-year-old son Owen is always by her side and willing to help his mum with everyday tasks like pushing up her sleeves and opening her makeup. Her 4-month-old daughter Amelia is now catching up on the bonding time she missed with her mum in the very first months of life. That's one of the things that does break my heart a little bit still, and that I'm working through, is that mummy guilt of not being able to be with my baby every day for the first 3 months of her life. Christina Pacheco said, but you know, I'm home now, and we're making those adaptations as we go, and we're adjusting and being a little family again.